Welcome to Lawton Online with your host, Andrew Lawton. He's locked, loaded, and ready to fire. Lawton Online starts right now.
Hello and welcome to you. My name's Andrew Lawton. This is Lawton Online here on TheRebel.media. It is so wonderful to have you tuned in for the second episode of our little foray into the interwebs here. It was absolutely great last week on the show for the inaugural episode to have Mark Stein on, talking about many things, but specifically his new book, or the new book in which he is a contributor, Climate Change, The Facts. If you missed that podcast and you're just joining me today for the first time, you can absolutely find that and all future episodes when they come out at TheRebel.media. Just look for the Andrew Lawton name, but actually click on everything, because everything there is wonderful in its fearlessness. It's going to be a great podcast up ahead today. I'm going to be talking later on in the show, for whatever reason, about Madonna. I'm still regretting it to this very moment that I'm going to have a Madonna-related discussion on the podcast, but it also has to do with Margaret Thatcher. So if you're wondering how those two end up in the same discussion, I implore you to tune in later on in the show just to understand, if nothing else, how on earth that happened. As well, later on in the program, I'm going to be talking about what I think is a very concerning trend in the West of essentially the demilitarization of the military. And I don't mean this in terms of taking away their equipment, but I mean this in taking away the image that has often times through history been just as important as the training in terms of how the military is perceived and what they're able to do. There's a couple of Canadian stories I'm going to touch on, but one American story in particular of cadets at a university campus in the U.S., Army cadets, being forced to wear high-heeled shoes, and this is not part of a humiliating training exercise. No, this is part of a charitable event that the military is supporting. I don't have a problem with the event at all. I have a problem with soldiers in uniform or cadets in uniform sullying what that uniform represents by having to wear high-heeled shoes. So that's coming up later on in the program as well. But I wanted to begin by talking about a study that recently came out via Forum Research and the London Free Press, and it's a very concerning one because it touches on two very big problems that I think are facing millennials today, facing young people. One of them is a culture of entitlement, and we'll get to that in a second. The second one is an overvaluation of post-secondary education. An overvaluation of a university degree, not just financially, but in terms of its essential moral value, if any, in your life, in your career. And the study was looking at who should pay university and college tuition. Now, at the end of the day, there are only two options: yourself or someone else. Now, the question of who this someone else is where we reach, I think, our sticking point here. Because I'm sure you can find lots of prospective university or college students who think that their parents should pay for it. Maybe some who think, well, student loans should pay for it, and then eventually when I'm working, when I'm, getting a job at McDonald's with my master's degree in basket weaving, I will pay those student loans back and then, go to graduate school again and get a PhD and still work at McDonald's and pay the student loans back. But you know what? I'll at least pay them back. Well, those are less reprehensible than what the actual majority of Canadians think the answer to that question should be. And according to this study, 53% of Canadians feel that the government should pay. That post-secondary tuition for all Canadian citizens should be free. I'm sure free has an asterisk beside it, because free to the recipient does not mean the actual program lacked a cost. But more than half of Canadians think that you should not have to shell out any money, nor go into debt, nor beg mommy and daddy to help you out if you want to go and get a post-secondary diploma or degree. Now, let's assume that all of the people, or I hope anyway, we can assume that all of the people who responded this way in the survey are aware of the fact that there is inevitably a cost in actually giving someone an education. Yes, universities and colleges have a markup. Yes, they obviously are very well funded through private and government funding. But it costs them money to provide a service. That service is an education. The outcome of that is a degree or a diploma, but I'm going to focus mostly on universities for the course of this discussion. President of Forum Research, Lauren Bozinoff, said it shows that a large number of people see the benefit of free tuition. I think that is kind of a statement that could have come from Captain Obvious. I'm pretty sure people see the benefit in anything for free because, let's face it, people do not like paying for stuff. But let's call a spade here. If you make university free or college free, you're going to get a lot more leeches than you would if you force people to pay for it. See, right now, as much as a lot of students, specifically those on the left, being, well, any students, like to decry the cost of tuition, like to decry the amount of debt into which they have to enter as students, it doesn't really bode well for their case that you have so many students who are taking 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old undergraduate studies and not really graduating, not really getting their degree. And I'm not sure what the reason for this is. Are they enjoying the, raucous campus lifestyle? Are they enjoying the fact that by going into debt and getting out student loans, they don't really need to pay for the experience? And, well, they can milk not having to work and have a real job for a little while, so they're just going to keep staying in school until they absolutely get cut off by the government or run out of drinking money. I don't know. But what I found very interesting was the skewing of who was most likely to support free tuition. Young people, obviously, the ones who would stand to benefit from it the most. The less wealthy people, again, people that can't afford to out-of-pocket spend the $10,000 a year on tuition and accommodation, perhaps even more. Atlantic Canadians, they're people who, well, they just were promised free beer for doing the study. And New Democrat voters. This is what I find funny here. So NDP voters most likely to think the government should cover tuition for free. And we're not talking about offering student loans. We're not talking about offering grants and bursaries. We're talking about ensuring free education, basically nationalizing post-secondary education in the way that high schools and elementary schools are in Canada today for the most part. And to me, I don't think anyone here is surprised. If you are surprised by this, you probably should be listening to the podcast a little bit more because you have a lot to learn. But I don't think anyone's surprised that the NDP wants free stuff, that the NDP is by its nature a socialist entity. But it's the level of ignorance that I think comes along with this study that also shows a very large gap in or between reality and people's perception of it. The fact that so many people believe that universities should be free in Canada means that all of these people are falling victim to a belief that a university education or a college education is in some way a good thing. And it can be, but not inevitably. 75% of respondents said that a diploma or a degree leads to a higher quality of life. Now, 75% is a large number. That means 3/4 of people think that if you have a diploma or a degree, you lead to a higher quality of life. Now, there was actually a recent study in Canada that was done, I think under Statistics Canada, that came out just a couple of days ago talking about how happy Canadians are. And I think they found that, wealthy, educated people are the happiest, but are they happy because they're wealthy and educated, or are they just happy because they're wealthy? Does education lead to wealth? Well, if we include in the discussion a lot of trades, your plumbers, your millwrights, your welders, your electricians, people who don't have a conventional post-secondary education, but are, in a lot of cases, making a lot more money and have a lot more job security, fixing the pipes and the ballasts, of those who do have their university degrees. And I think, myth of the university graduate working at McDonald's is not really rooted in fiction. And we see an indoctrination on campuses. There's no denying that. I don't think anyone, even on the left, denies it. They're just happy about which direction students are indoctrinated in. But where did we go wrong? I think you can look through history and see a gradual decline in the ability that a university degree gives you when it comes to finding gainful employment. That is very easily understood and analyzed and observed. But it's only been within the last maybe 10 or 20 years that it's gotten to the point where it's at now, where there's almost this elitist judgment against those who choose not to go to university. And despite the fact that so many university graduates end up going to college anyway because they need something that's a little bit more practical and hands-on, there still is this belief that you're somehow a failure. And this is advanced in so many public high schools, that you're a failure if you do not get a university degree. And I'm not talking about a degree in engineering. I'm not talking about a medical degree. I'm not taking a law degree. As a matter of fact, I would argue that a law degree actually makes you a lesser human being, but I digress. I apologize if Ezra's tuning in to this part of the discussion, but it goes one step further, I think, because we're not talking about, for the most part, those degrees. We're talking about the antithesis of practical or professional degrees. We're talking about your BA in conflict resolution studies. We're talking about your BA in women's studies, women spelled WOMYN. We're talking about your undergraduate generic Bachelor of Arts that will perhaps lead to you taking graduate studies in another generic yet to be determined program and moving the goalpost of having to grow up and be an adult further and further down the line. That is what I think is the most concerning reality about this study. Not even that more than half of Canadians want it to be free, but that they want it at all. That 3/4 of them think that somehow you have a better life if you have a degree. Now, are those people, are the 75% of respondents in this study saying that because they believe it or because they think they have to? Is a valid question here. It's the same as if you ask people what media they watch, as opposed to actually tracking it. In the U.S., they've actually looked at this. People will overwhelmingly say PBS and NPR because they think it makes them seem smarter, when in actuality, the ratings of those outlets don't actually reflect how many people say they watch or listen to them. I'm pretty sure you could see a similar phenomenon if you looked at CBC. And I say this as someone not trying to knock what university is. I had a lot of very valuable experiences there. I went to school in London, Ontario, Western University's Huron College for political science. And did it help me in my career? Not directly. Did I meet some people that helped me? Yes. Did I maybe pick up some things along the way? Yes, but I don't follow a conventional career trajectory in the sense that I don't need to rely on a degree for employment like so many people do. And I feel bad for people graduating high school today who want to be industrious, who want to enter the workforce, who want to do so much with their life and are handicapped by a false demand for a degree. And I think you see a lot of this. I've heard from these people who have emailed me, students, high school students even, that have used to saw me on Sun or listened to my show, etc., and they've asked me for career advice, and I always hate it. I mean, generally speaking, if you're taking your advice from me, you're at a new low point in your life, and I can't really guarantee that my advice is going to do anything but make things worse for you. But it's tough because instinctively, I want to tell people, look, if you feel you can create something, if you feel like you can contribute something as it is, don't waste your time and money at university. But a part of me also recognizes that we need to understand where the demands are. And even if it's an artificial demand that exists for young talent with degrees, it still is a demand that is there. But I think employers need to take a step back and question where this is really coming from. Because if we have so many employers that are saying, and look at any big company's job posting, whether it's a Fortune 500 company or whether it's public sector, you're going to find that they're asking for applicants to have a university degree without even really specifying what the degree is. They don't care. It's not because you're expected to have learned something that will be applicable to the job for which you're applying. It's because apparently it just makes you a better person. And people try to spin it by saying, oh, well, it means you know how to learn, or it means you know how to write, or it means that you know how to commit to something. No, what it actually means is that the left has managed to create this air of elitism that has made people who have actually spent 4 years out of high school creating something somehow morally inferior to people that have done their BA in basket weaving. And look through a course catalog at a university, by the way, and you'll find a lot of things on there, like courses I could never pass, like, kinesiology and organic chemistry. And then you'll also see something like a full-year course on the philosophy of Harry Potter and a 4-year course on Seinfeld. And you have to wonder, is this, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 a year for tuition really making me a smarter person, or am I doing it just because I feel I have to? More of Lawton Online coming up in just a few moments on TheRebel.media. I'm Andrew Lawton. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Lawton Online with your host, Andrew Lawton, exclusively on TheRebel.media.
Welcome back to Lawton Online on TheRebel.media. Wanted to talk about a story that actually impacts our neighbors to the south. It's a story out of the United States, but it's one with, I think, a concerning theme that we can certainly find our own parallels to. And it's actually twofold. Number one, it's the attitudes prevailing on a lot of campuses that are rearing their heads in this story, but also a more concerning and I'd say more imminent challenge. It's one we've seen as recently as a couple of weeks ago, which is a dilution of the intent and value of members of the armed forces. I'll talk about the Canadian context of that very shortly, but I wanted to give you a bit of a rundown. This is a story that's come via the IJReview.com as well as the Washington Times in the U.S. And it's almost one of these too strange to be true, stranger than fiction. And it's about Army cadets who are claiming on message boards that they were pressured to walk in high heels at the campus of Arizona State University at an event designed to raise awareness of sexual violence against women. The event is something that's celebrated in Canada as well, called Walk a Mile in Her Shoes. The event is very novel, men and women, but it's obviously more amusing for men, don a pair of red high heels. And I don't know if they have to walk a whole mile or if it's a symbolic mile, but they raise pledges and then they walk in high heels. And for some men, it's shockingly easy for them. So you can glean from that whatever you will about their extracurricular activities. But the whole point of it is that you raise funds, you raise awareness for violence against women, specifically men's violence against women and sexual violence against women. And look, I don't know much about the organizations responsible for this. I don't know much about where the money goes or what it does. I've heard a lot of people address this and support this from all sides of the political spectrum. I don't know enough about Walk a Mile in Her Shoes to have any specific issues with it. But I have a big issue with forced charity. And I have a big issue with optics. And the fact that the Army last year allowed soldiers to participate while wearing their uniform and cadets to participate in this. It's even more concerning this year when we're hearing reports from people within that community, from cadets, that this was actually mandated, that there was actually a strong arming that had to happen here. And the response has been an optical nightmare. There's one screenshot of a text message conversation from an anonymous cadet who writes this, and I'll give you a bit of a language warning in advance here, but hey, it's a podcast, so I won't censor out the word. So check this out, the message writes. Tomorrow morning, our entire ROTC battalion is doing this Walk a Mile in Her Shoes event. where we all need to walk a mile in ACUs with bright red high heels in place of our boots to promote awareness for sexual abuse on campus. Attendance is mandatory, and if we miss it, we get a negative counseling and a, quote, does not support the battalion #EO mission on our CDT OER for getting the branch we want. So that's basically a permanent note in their record that could impact them negatively as far as career aspirations within the Corps later on. The message continues, so I just spent $16 on a pair of high heels that I have to spray paint red later only to throw them in the trash after 300 of us embarrass the Army tomorrow. Just a heads up for when you see us all over Army WTF moments, us infantry, Gruntworks, and every other Army page on the internet. This is hands down the stupidest fucking thing I've done. And I am inclined to agree with him. I feel sorry for him. I do. I feel sorry for him because I know that a lot of men and women who are in the military and in its parallel organizations, be they cadet programs, reservists, militia, etc., have a great deal of pride and respect for their role, for their uniform, and for the authority figures that tell them what they have to do. And I know that a lot of them, probably most of them, if not all of them, will do this or did this without question, because it's what they were ordered to do. But I have to sincerely question why on earth, or how on earth, anyone thought this was a good idea. And you know, the pictures are worth 1,000 words, in this case 10,000 words. You know, when they're talking about the U.S. military in the boardrooms of enemy countries, this is the picture they're going to show. This is the picture they're going to show their forces. You don't think you can beat the Americans? Well, here's the footwear they put on. And you can say it's all in good fun. It's all for a good cause. It's all for protecting women. It's all for making a statement. The statement that is made by this, however, has nothing to do with violence against women and everything to do with a wimpification of soldiers. People who are among the bravest in the country who are now subjected to a punchline. And we're talking about cadets here, not enlisted members, but it doesn't really matter. A uniform is a uniform. It's all part of the same challenge here. It's all part of the same problem in my eyes. And the Army is always one that has, or at least for the last few years, embraced its participation in Walk a Mile in Her Shoes events. They've typically said that it is simply encouraged, and if you don't want to walk, you should still make a donation. But that's very different than what we're hearing now from the inside of the ROTC cadets, which is that they are expected. The IJ Review headline is, "The footwear cadets were allegedly forced to wear during political event march has sparked an uproar." And I clicked on that link figuring, oh, I don't know, maybe it's some different kind of boot that's made by some, free trade or fair trade company, whatever. No, I was not expecting bright red high heels. This is like the Wizard of Oz meets MASH here, people. Except I'm sure if they tried to click them 3 times to get home, it probably didn't work, but I can be darn sure they were probably trying. And PJmedia.com's Deborah Hine had written on this a little bit further, and she said that this falls into the campus narrative that we see all over America, and also I can say here in Canada as well. Barbara Kay of the National Post has written about this at great length, this promulgation of the rape culture myth. And rape culture is so concerning because the addition of the word culture has taken the discussion away from one of actual rape and sexual assault on campus and into a realm where you are trying to prove that something exists in absence of any evidence to support it. Rape culture exists where rape does not. And this is why, to bring it around to another discussion here, the Rolling Stone article from November, A Rape on Campus, gained so much traction because rape culture and those who push that school of thought forward have succeeded in creating a world where people find it so believable that a vicious gang rape could take place on a fraternity. People are like, oh, yes, well, we've heard about this rape culture thing having a stronghold, so that means this must have happened. And, of course, that article ended up being nothing but fiction. And I actually interviewed on my radio show on AM 980 in London just last week one of the friends, just as an aside here, of Jackie, the character, and frankly, the liar at the root of the Rolling Stone article, the one who deceived Sabrina Erdely, the author of that article, the one who kickstarted this and basically encouraged Rolling Stone to write a piece of fiction. I spoke to one of her friends, a student at the University of Virginia, actually from Toronto originally. And I interviewed him about this, not about rape culture, but about that story. And he said that it was woven together in such a way that people believed it because it almost had that feeling of being like a movie. And that was so very interesting to me because in a lot of cases, rape culture is something that is purely fictitious. And that doesn't mean that rape and sexual assault don't exist, but we need to distinguish that the second you start talking about rape culture, it's when you're talking about something that apparently exists or leads to the existence of sexual assault through words. That's the best way to describe it. As though a word somehow carries the same weight as a vicious or violent or, at the very least, drug-induced date rape, as though that is at all paralleled by these linguistic battles. Now, I got off on a bit of a tangent there talking about the rape culture aspect of this. That was something on pjmedia.com that I think is certainly at the stake of this. Because it probably has led to organizations like the Cadet Corps, organizations like other participants of Walk a Mile in Her Shoes to feel like they have to go forward with these things, to feel like they have to embrace these things, because if not, then we're supporting and promoting and advancing rape culture. And no one wants to be seen as being responsible for that. So I have to wonder if, as Deborah writes, that may have been part of the problem there. That may have been part of the catalyst for cadets to be forced to put on their red high heels and march in a parade, humiliating and devaluing the American armed forces in the process, and I'd argue soldiers anywhere. And on a more serious note, I wanted to mention something in Canada going back a couple of weeks that I feel is also symptomatic of this challenge, which is a wimpification, to use the nicest word possible, of the military. And we've seen actually two stories in Canada that I think address this in different ways. One is only a couple of weeks ago, as a matter of fact, with the return of the honor guard at the National War Memorial in Ottawa. Among the security changes are armed Ottawa police officers standing guard to protect the soldiers who are standing at the War Memorial and at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. I don't need to tell you that this was where in October Corporal Nathan Cirillo was shot by a radical Islamist terrorist. He was shot while holding a decorative gun that had no ammunition. And I don't want to speculate and say that had he had a gun that was loaded, he could have defended himself. No one knows that. But the fact is, the government has moved forward upon the basis of thinking that if someone is at the War Memorial with a firearm, they can protect themselves and others. So it would stand to reason that soldiers who are there, yes, in a ceremonial role, but still soldiers nonetheless, still subject to training, should be able to carry a firearm to protect themselves, instead of having to be wussified while having someone else there hired to protect them. And if we're dealing with a question of practicality here, oh, well, a rifle is not a gun you use to defend yourself, give them a sidearm. If we're dealing with a question of jurisdiction, change the law. The government said it considered that, but ultimately settled on having off-duty Ottawa police officers there. I don't know if it's an optics question. Perhaps they don't want the headline if a Canadian soldier has to shoot a Canadian at the War Memorial. I don't know if that's what the rationale for this quote-unquote solution is. But then you look on the $10 bill in Canada. The $10 bill in Canada is a classic example of what exactly is the problem here. You have a military theme, a war theme, commending Canada's role in history. On this bill, you have a female soldier, very politically correct, but no problems with that. And what's she holding? Is it one of the guns that Canadian Armed Forces members used in World War II? In World War I, when we were storming the beaches? Is it one of the guns that we used when we were in Afghanistan? One of the guns that we're using while we are supporting our allies in northern Iraq in the fight against ISIS? No, she's holding binoculars. Holding binoculars, yes, the true tool of the Canadian Armed Forces, binoculars, because after all, the most important thing that our men and women in uniform should be able to do is see far away. Don't get me wrong, that's certainly a part of their role. But why not give her a firearm? What is it about the optics of a soldier holding a gun, a tool that they have used throughout history to advance good, to advance what Canadians are fighting for? Why is it so controversial for them to be holding that? And you may remember a few weeks ago, there was a very fascinating story and a very disturbing story about the Navy League of Canada. Now, the Navy League is not the Navy Cadet program, which operates alongside the Navy in Canada. The Naval League is a paramilitary organization. It's done to prepare kids who might want to be Navy cadets. I think the people in it are grade 7 and 8, so 12, 13, etc. And the Navy League, in their drills, in their marches, has up to this point wielded a fake rifle. It's a fake rifle. I'm not even sure they look that realistic, but they do this in their drills, and they're taught to march. They're taught how to handle it, and it's a toy gun. But like anything else, like any other firearm, they're told never point it at anyone. They're told how to handle it. They're told how important it is, ceremonial or not. It still is a replica firearm. Well, caving to political correctness, a few weeks ago, the Navy League of Canada decided they were going to remove that from its drills. Disarm the members because they said they didn't like the optics of children carrying guns. Forget about the fact that they're children for a moment. They're wearing in that role a uniform. A uniform that symbolizes the uniform worn by the men and women in uniform today and the men and women in uniform in past and present conflicts in which Canada is embroiled. A uniform that has not been afraid when necessary to get dirty, to become stained with the blood of our soldiers who have sacrificed themselves and stained with the blood of the enemies they've shot. I don't want to gross you out, but it's important to realize that war is not pretty. But I think every developed nation in the world recognizes that it is at some times necessary. And obviously, kids in the Navy League are not entering into battle. But why send your kids to that program instead of to Beavers or Cubs or Girl Guides? Because obviously you want to either prepare them or allow them to learn about this important part about Canada. It's a group that pays tribute to members of the Canadian Navy and by extension emulates much of what they do, including the drills. So I don't like that we are now trying to remove these guns that cause no danger to anyone because we don't like the optics of what? Of people in an organization that is very similar to a military organization having a firearm? Is anyone under the impression that Canada's military does not use guns? Apart from Justin Trudeau, who, as we've heard, and as I heard in my interview with him back in January on my radio show, pretty much believes that our soldiers are, quote-unquote, too good to be shooting people. Those are my words, but paraphrasing a sentiment that he's given, which is essentially that our military is not there for fighting, but there just to, well, you've heard his comments, drop off parkas. Obviously, we haven't equipped our soldiers just yet with red high heels, but don't get me wrong, if Justin Trudeau is elected, I wouldn't put it past him. We've got to take a quick break here. Lawton Online on TheRebel.media resumes in just a couple of moments. Stay tuned. I'll be right back.
He's irreverent, intelligent, and indefatigable. You're tuned in to Lawton Online with Andrew Lawton.
Welcome back to Lawton Online. I wanted to take a little bit of time here and share with you a story that is local to a city in Canada, but is one that has national implications. Specifically for people in Ontario, but even across the board, it's an all too common theme, which is subversion of people being entrepreneurial, subversion of the little man trying to make it in the world. And it's also about something that unites us all, which is beer. If you are in Ontario, there's a good chance you may have seen a microbrewery's products in your local LCBO. If you're not from Ontario, that's our state-owned liquor control board, because after all, you can only buy liquor from the government in most Canadian provinces, although that is changing, admittedly. The Premier of Ontario, Kathleen Wynne, is moving forward a long overdue plan to put beer in a limited number of grocery stores. I think we need to move far closer towards the Alberta model myself, but we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later. If you shopped at the LCBO, you may have seen a product called Forked River. This is a microbrewery in London, Ontario, my hometown, and they are experiencing something that makes me yearn for a more sensible government, yearn for a smaller bureaucracy. And I'm actually quite surprised the story hasn't picked up nationally. Maybe this will be the moment it happens. Breaking it to you here on The Rebel, because one of the beers that they have is their signature brew. It's launched their company. It's gotten them listed in the LCBO. And like any brewery, Forked River wants to be able to sell its products at its factory. If you go to a Labatt brewery, you can buy Labatt beer there. If you go to a Molson brewery, like the one in Toronto on Carlingview and Etobicoke, you can buy Molson beer. And of course, if you go to the beer store, which is the oligopoly mandated by the Ontario provincial government, owned by Labatt, Molson, and Sleeman, part owners in this company that looks like a private enterprise but really isn't, you can, of course, buy beer from the big three there. And this beer store, which admittedly I love the name, has caused Ontarians a lot of problems over the past years, especially because of these secret agreements negotiated behind closed doors that have prevented Ontarians from being able to access certain products at other stores that aren't the beer store, and that has forced the beer store essentially, or enabled or empowered the beer store rather, to sell only products manufactured by the big beer retailers, by Anheuser-Busch, by Sleeman Sapporo, by Molson Coors, etc. So because of that, if you want to buy beer from a microbrewery in Ontario, your options are pretty much limited to the LCBO, which is very difficult to get a product listed at, and the brewery itself. So Forked River comes into the story in a very large way because they've been operating for only a couple of years in London, and they are not a huge company. As a matter of fact, even knowing they were in London, I had no idea until just a couple of days ago where in the city they actually were. That's how small they are. But still, they managed to eke out enough success in a short span of time after essentially less than 2 years of being open that there has been a demand for their product. They don't own a huge facility. As a matter of fact, they don't own a facility at all. They lease a couple of units of a big industrial park in East London, and they want to, on their property, open up a retail outlet, a factory store, where if you go for a tour of the brewery, that you can then buy a 6-pack or a 12-pack, or maybe even if you're feeling really brave, heck, the May 2-4 weekend's coming up, buy a 24-pack of the beer that you just saw get made. Well, the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario has decided it will not let them do that. And this is where it gets so very concerning, because Forked River actually reached out in advance of building their retail space, which they've already constructed and spent thousands of dollars in the process to do it. They reached out to the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario before constructing it. They reached out before constructing it and said, can we do this? Are we going to be within the letter of the law? Is this something that's acceptable? And the AGCO said this to them, quote, when you relocate, notify via letter to the address above, and she will send out an AGCO inspector to conduct an inspection of the new store. So they wouldn't even give them an advance thumbs up or thumbs down on whether or not this would be acceptable. They said, look, you have to move ahead with it. You have to pay for this. You have to shell out this money. And then afterward, we'll inspect it and tell you whether or not you can use it. They would not give them permission for future plans. They would only point to documentation on the website, which Forked River looked at. And they saw that the only regulation for creating a retail space was that it be on the same parcel of land. Those are the AGCO's words, the same parcel of land that the actual brewery is on. So they made sure they went down to the land registry office. They looked out the map of their property and they saw, okay, even though this store is going to be in a different unit in this industrial park, they confirmed that it was indeed by the city and the province's own standards on one parcel of land. Problem solved. So they built it. I don't know the exact price tag, but I know it was thousands of dollars, if not tens of thousands of dollars to build it, plus the actual leasing of the space in which the retail establishment is housed. And then they went to the AGCO, as was requested, and they said, here's our application. And the AGCO had said, are they all on the same parcel of land with the same municipal address? Forked River said, yes, they're all on a single parcel of land, but we only rent certain units on that parcel. And then the AGCO denied them. The liquor and gaming bureaucrats in Ontario said, we are denying this application because your store is off-site. If by off-site you mean you have to walk across a parking lot and not exit the property, then yes, it's off-site, but that is not off-site at all. The physical buildings are all connected to each other, but you have to get from one to the other, yes, walk through a parking lot, but you are still by the letter of the law on one parcel of land, which is all that the bureaucrats have demanded. And let's not forget here that this was a decision that could have been made by the AGCO when they were asked for permission in advance, still reprehensible, but could have been denied up front without having forced this small business to shell out the money to build this now unusable facility. But here's where it gets interesting, because the province of Ontario has already granted special license in figurative speech as well as in actual on-paper licenses to the big beer companies like Labatt's and Molson via the beer store agreement. So the province has already shown preferential treatment to large breweries. And it appears that the AGCO is also unequally offering special treatment to these organizations as well. And the proprietors of Forked River actually shared two aerial maps. One of the Labatt Brewery in London, Ontario, the other of the Molson Brewery on Carlingview in Etobicoke, both of which have retail stores that are housed in separate buildings than the actual brewery. Were they on the same parcel of land? Maybe. But by the rules put forth by the AGCO for Forked River, it appears that these stores should not be allowed to exist. And this is where you get to one of two problems, one of two quandaries that we can surmise from this. Number one, the province and its bureaucracy is so inept they don't even understand their own rules and enforce them unequally. And you know what? If you look at a case like this and government decisions that are wrong, incompetence is usually a pretty valid assumption. It's better than the alternative, which is an outright sense of malice. An oligopoly in the beer store and the LCBO that is so ingrained in the cultural identity of Ontario and the mindset of the regulators that they have to go through extraordinary hoops to make life a living hell for small businesses, people that are trying to offer something that is clearly popular to the consumer and, for the most part, I'd say better quality. Not to cast aspersions on Labatt and Molson. I'm not a huge beer drinker, but I know that craft breweries have a bit of a more intimate focus and small-scale production that somehow endears themselves to drinkers of craft beers in many cases. But why not let the consumer choose? Why are you handicapping a company that already has the deck stacked against it by not allowing them to sell beer on their own darn property? And especially when we're seeing an unequal application of the rules. It's not even like the rules themselves are flawed, which admittedly I think they are. It's that they're not even being applied equally across the board. I'm looking at these aerial maps and the statement by the Forked River team, as well as in other media reports like at am980.ca and in the London Free Press about this. And there are two very, very important comparisons here. One is the Labatt Brewery retail outlet I mentioned a couple of moments ago, which is connected, the retail store to the brewery now, by a cold room they added last year, but the actual store has been on-site, or by the AGCO's definition, off-site, for quite a while. And at Molson, looking at an aerial map right now, the retail store is actually in the parking lot. Not only is it not connected, it might not even be on the same parcel of land as the actual brewery itself. Now, am I saying that because Labatt and Molson have retail outlets in different buildings that they should be shut down? Absolutely not. I think we should allow the consumer to decide. I don't think that somehow a store that is attached to one building is more safe or responsible than one that is across the street, one that's even on the other side of town. Why don't you let any brewery say, you know what, we're going to pick one factory store, and that's going to be where we're going to house our products. That will be our official source of these products. Why not let the consumer decide? And alcohol is one of these areas in Ontario where, first off, the ultimate irony is that in order to navigate all the liquor laws in Ontario, I think you need to assume copious amounts of the product itself if you can get your hands on it. But you have these archaic laws that say you can't bring products from one province to another. There's a wine that I like, for example. It's not carried by the LCBO. You can't get it anywhere else. They sell it in Alberta. But legally, I am not allowed to order it and have it shipped to me. No, instead, I have to go to a private distributor, pay a great deal of money as an import fee, and guess where I have to pick up the product? From the LCBO. I have to do the legwork. I have to source it. I have to find it. But I get to, or have to, go to the government to pay for it. And then you look at the U.S., where alcohol-related crime is ultimately no different than it is in Canada. It's more available, it's more accessible, and it is more inexpensive. I was in Michigan just a few days ago, and I love it. You have these signs at grocery stores and at various corner stores saying the state minimum is all we charge for liquor. So even though the government has a few controls on there, the fact that I can get Canadian products in Michigan for a fraction of the cost that I can get them for in Canada speaks volumes about a problem that we have in the way that we view the law. And the fact that the lawmakers themselves or the law enforcers don't even seem to understand their own darn law. What the hell are we paying them to do? We got to take a break here. When we return on the program, I'm going to be doing the unthinkable, as I promised earlier, which is talking about, you guessed it, Madonna. But stay tuned for that. That's coming up in just a few moments. And after that, the weekly feature here on Lawton Online, It Must Be a Liberal. Lots more fun coming up on The Rebel. Stay tuned. I'm Andrew Lawton.
You're listening to Lawton Online with your host, Andrew Lawton, exclusively on TheRebel.media. Email your thoughts to Andrew at andrewlawton.ca or tweet Andrew using @AndrewLawton.
Welcome back to Lawton Online here on TheRebel.media. I'm Andrew Lawton, and I come bearing a bit of a more sentimental, if not even sad, or at the very least confused note. I have to open up my soul a little bit on this segment. You know, there comes a time in every man's life, at least every broadcaster's life, where he has to ask the question of whether or not it's still worth continuing. I fear that moment will come in a few minutes here, after I've had to do the unthinkable, which is defend Madonna. Yes, Madonna, the singer who made out with Britney Spears on stage, the singer who sexually assaulted Canadian rapper Drake on stage in Los Angeles a couple of weeks ago at Coachella. Madonna, the woman who, well, is Madonna. I have to find myself defending her against the bullies. There's a very big story in the UK, believe it or not. There was a great write-up in the Daily Mail about this. Madonna did something that I don't think a lot of people would have expected from her. She paid homage to Margaret Thatcher, the late Margaret Thatcher, Baroness, former Prime Minister, and all-around a wonderful, strong woman. The Iron Lady, she was known. A resolute, determined woman, independent, fierce, revolutionized her country and politics in general, and has served as a model and an inspiration for so many. Not Madonna. That's Margaret Thatcher, I assure you. But Margaret Thatcher was the source of an Instagram post by Madonna just a couple of days ago. What happened was Madonna posted a picture of the Iron Lady along with a quote from her. And that quote is something that is not even political. It has nothing to do with Margaret Thatcher's policies. It has nothing to do with Margaret Thatcher as a conservative prime minister. And everything to do with Margaret Thatcher as a strong, powerful, and independent woman. The quote was, I'd argue, a very inspirational one. Unfortunately, it was deleted only a few minutes later by Madonna herself. And the quote was, quote, "If you set out to be liked, you would be prepared to compromise on anything, at any time, and you would achieve nothing." And she captioned it as, "Thank you, Margaret Thatcher. Hashtag unapologetic, hashtag rebel heart." I think she's sending a message to us here at TheRebel.media with the rebel heart hashtag, but the response she got was nothing short of spectacular, and I don't mean in a good way. Sure, you had a few conservatives that would have responded and lauded her for it. As a matter of fact, a former UK Conservative member of Parliament did exactly that. But then you had people, specifically the gay community, on Twitter and Instagram, expressing their frustration, and not only because they disagreed with Margaret Thatcher's policies, but their hatred towards Madonna now because she dared to quote this wonderful woman. Lauren Martin on Twitter writes, "Madonna posting photos in praise of Thatcher, then swiftly deleting them. What a wrongin'." Kensha on Twitter writes, "Lost a bit of respect for Madonna for posting a picture of Margaret Thatcher. That woman ruined this country, wrecked so many lives. Erg." You see, the point wasn't really made before the erg was put into effect. Lisa writes, "Madonna, I used to be inspired by you. Now I'm just tired of you. Margaret Thatcher ain't no role model. Get a grip on reality." Really? I think you're the one that needs the reality check, because much of the ire that led to Madonna deleting this Instagram post came from her gay fan base. I don't think it's any secret that Madonna has a large one of those, perhaps even larger than mine. And a lot of them were tweeting and Instagramming and Facebooking her, talking about the fact that Margaret Thatcher enacted legislation that was in the 80s, and certainly by conventional standards, not friendly to the gay movement. and those within it fighting for advanced freedoms. Now, it's easy to sort of look at this and say that this was 1988. The world's changed in a lot of ways, and every politician will do things in their career that may not stand the test of time. Most of what Margaret Thatcher has done has, however. And the legislation was overturned anyway, 12 years ago. I mean, the bill they were going after was a provision of the Local Government Act. And it was responding to councils in various neighborhoods in the UK promoting gay relationships, homosexuality in schools. They were trying to combat, I think through conventional logic at the time, not sure it holds up now, but trying to combat the rise of AIDS. So what she had passed was a bill preventing the use of taxpayers' money to fund books, plays, pamphlets, movies, or anything else showing gay relationships as normal, and, quote, promoting the teaching in any maintained school of the acceptability of homosexuality as a pretended family relationship, unquote. You don't have to agree with what Margaret Thatcher did and her government in 1988. You don't have to agree with Margaret Thatcher's quote that if you set out to be liked, you would be prepared to compromise on anything at any time, and you would achieve nothing. But what I find so hilarious is how quick people are, especially in the age of social media, to throw Madonna under the bus, a woman who I'm going to assume, given that many of these people have hashtags about her and have incorporated her name in their usernames and have probably bought all of her albums, etc., will throw her under the bus so quickly because she says something positive about someone who almost 30 years ago said or did something negative about a group in which they are involved, or a group whose rights and whose progress these people support. I don't get it. I don't get this guilt by association. It's not even like Madonna had said, I am really glad that Margaret Thatcher put forth that policy in 1988. I'm not even sure Madonna could tell you how many guys she slept with in 1988. In any case, it to me is so disgusting how anyone, not just celebrities, but it happens to so many different people, is so subject to this mob because they dare to do or say or support something or someone who is unpopular, or in the case of Margaret Thatcher, was very popular until the political demise. But it's not even about Margaret Thatcher. It could have been about Tony Blair. It could have been John Major. It could have been about Billy Joel. It doesn't matter. The quote itself stands on its own legs, and I find it so ironic and perhaps a little bit shameful on the part of Madonna that despite the fact that she was lauding Margaret Thatcher for a quote about being uncompromising and unapologetic, later became something that Madonna had to hide from. As a matter of fact, I don't even think we can say Madonna had earned the right to invoke Margaret Thatcher. I don't think she earned the right to channel Margaret Thatcher. But here we have Madonna subject to the mob, even though she should be able to look at her own history, look at her own career, look at her own record and say, I've done enough for the gay community, for my gay fans. I've done enough for these people to stand on my own two legs, to stand on my own merits, and not have to worry about apologizing for something, especially when I've done nothing wrong. That should be the mindset that she holds. Now, perhaps I'm giving Madonna a little bit too much credit here by projecting any sort of logical or rational thought or chain of thinking to her. But I want to believe that maybe a glimmer of sense has somehow broken its way into her mind, despite a lot of her cockamamie policies and pronouncements and actions in the past. Perhaps a seed was planted at some point. Maybe Sean Penn did it, who knows? And she saw something in the Iron Lady. Let's hold on to that. Let's bring back this Madonna. Or maybe Madonna is a closet Tory. You laugh now, but it certainly puts this into a new context.
True blue, baby, I love you.
Yes, perhaps the real true blue was Margaret Thatcher, having earned the support of Madonna. I have no idea when that song came out, but hey, they might have been around the same time. You never know. I'm probably going to get sued for Madonna for playing that song in any sort of context pertaining to conservatism. We've got to take a quick break here. Lawton Online continues on TheRebel.media in just a couple of moments. I'm Andrew Lawton. Stay with us.
It's time for It Must Be a Liberal, only on Lawton Online. Scouring every corner of the globe for stories so outrageous, there must be a liberal involved.
You heard the man here on Lawton Online. It's time for everyone's favorite weekly segment, at least my favorite, and well, I'm hosting the show solo, so I don't think anyone else's opinion matters for the time being. It's time for It Must Be a Liberal. Yes, I have scoured every corner of the globe. I've gone from Hawaii to Herzegovina, from Serbia to, well, Windsor. And I found the story that I think is so outrageous there must be a liberal involved. And today we actually go to none other than a New York State University campus, which has 2 chimpanzees that are used for research. Unfortunately, these chimpanzees are at the source of a court challenge being entertained by New York State Supreme Court Justice Barbara Jaffe in Manhattan, who issued an order this week on Monday calling a writ of habeas corpus. She is requiring the State University of New York at Stony Brook to fight to defend its right to keep these chimpanzees. Yes, an animal rights group has been the one who ultimately pushed for this, the mentality being that these chimps should not be allowed to be, quote, held captive at the university because they are autonomous and intelligent creatures. They want the pair of chimps to be sent to a sanctuary in Florida. They say it's unfair that they're used for research on physical movement. The law says an order can only be granted to a legal person. So the judge is actually going to be weighing whether or not these chimpanzees are actually legal persons. It's easy to laugh at this, but actually could be a precedent-setting ruling if it's determined that judges can grant human rights to chimpanzees. And I think we need to be even more concerned about what would happen to the Democratic vote, which I could guess would balloon, much like the NDP vote would here in Canada, were chimpanzees able to actually cast ballots. But here's my question to the animal rights activists that have been pushing for this. If the chimpanzees are so intelligent and autonomous, why did they not file the lawsuit themselves? Why can these activists decide where the chimpanzees go if they are so autonomous? I'm sensing a bit of a double standard here. It's okay to hold them captive in a sanctuary, but not in an actual university where they can be used to potentially save or, at the very least, change lives for the better. So when weighing the merits of this case, I have to say, New York State Supreme Court Justice Barbara Jaffe, who thinks it's even worth entertaining the notion that chimpanzees may in fact be entitled to human rights, safe to say she must be a liberal. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for tuning into the program. This is Lawton Online on TheRebel.media. A new episode comes out next Thursday. Mark it in your calendar. You won't want to miss that. And of course, between now and then, lots more incredible content and fearless content on TheRebel.media. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll talk to you next week, Canada.
Thanks for tuning in to Lawton Online. Check out TheRebel.media for lots more fearless content and commentary.